Welcome to this Executive Briefing Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something absolutely crucial: the specific SASB standards for identifying system vulnerabilities and securing the student data lifecycle. You know, if you look at the landscape of modern education, institutions are going through this massive digital reckoning. The days of simply relying on a physical brick-and-mortar campus wall, those are completely over. Today, colleges and universities are basically vast, complex digital networks. So in this explainer, we're going to explore exactly how these institutions have to proactively defend themselves using the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, framework. Specifically, we'll be zeroing in on standards SV-ED-230a.1 and 230a.2. Let's get right into it.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the cyber threat in education, move into identifying system vulnerabilities, and then discuss managing data security risks. After that, we'll track the student data lifecycle, and finally, wrap up with evaluating privacy impacts.
Okay, let's dive into this really foundational quote directly from the SASB standards. It states, "The industry may face data security risks because of the large number of personal records processed and stored, the mix of intellectual property and personally identifiable information held, and the open, collaborative environment of many campuses." I mean, that perfectly hits the nail on the head regarding the unique paradox universities face, right? Think about it. The very openness that makes a campus great, that fosters learning and innovation, inherently creates massive targets for cyber threats. You've got national identification numbers, vaccination records, financial data, and highly sensitive, cutting-edge research, all sitting in one collaborative ecosystem.
And the financial and regulatory worlds are taking this incredibly seriously. Data security actually sits right at the very top of the sustainability disclosure topics for the education sector. It is literally the very first metric listed. Why? Well, because a data breach here doesn't just mean your IT team is working over the weekend, it completely compromises public perception, it tanks institutional reputation, it actively hurts student enrollment, and for sure, it carries immense financial costs. Basically, data security is intrinsically tied to an institution's financial survival.
All right, Section 1, Identifying System Vulnerabilities. To start locking down our digital fortress, this is under standard SV-ED-230a.1, by the way. We absolutely have to accurately identify the specific weaknesses in our systems first. I mean, you can't protect what you don't understand. SASB explicitly defines a vulnerability as any exploitable weakness in your information systems, implementation, system security procedure, or internal controls. Notice how broad that is? It's not just about a bug in your software code. A vulnerability could be a huge gap in an internal control, like say a terrible password policy that lets incoming freshmen use password 123. Or it could even be a physical security flaw at the campus data center.
So how does that build into the broader picture of risk? Well, building on that previous definition, a data security risk is the actual potential for that vulnerability to impact operations, assets, or individuals. It's the event itself. We're talking unauthorized access, the destruction of student records, malicious modification of grades, or, nightmare scenario, a denial of service attack that entirely takes down the online learning portal right in the middle of finals week. If a vulnerability is an open window in your house, the data security risk is the burglar actually climbing through it, and the havoc they wreak once inside.
Moving right along to Section 2, Managing Data Security Risks.
Now that we've identified the threats and we know the stakes, let's explore how institutions are practically required to manage these risks. Because simply pointing them out is only half the battle, right? Proactive cybersecurity is so much more than just buying the most expensive firewall on the market. It requires a totally multifaceted defense strategy. Mitigation relies heavily on things like operational procedures, management processes, and how your products are structured. But look closely at those last couple of points: the careful selection of business partners, and critically, employee training. A university's biggest defense, and honestly, often its biggest vulnerability, is its people. Your faculty, your adjuncts, your administrative staff, they need ongoing training just as much as the IT department needs the latest tech.
And to prove they're doing this correctly, institutions can't just, make up their own rules as they go. Investors and regulators specifically want to see that your management approaches align with globally recognized external frameworks. The SASB standards highlight two absolute gold standards here: the ISO/IEC 27000- series and the 2018 NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Aligning with these rigorous frameworks proves to stakeholders that the institution's proactive cyber defense isn't just guesswork. It's mature, it's systematic, and it is benchmarked against the very best global practices.
Next up, Section 3, the Student Data Lifecycle.
Shifting over to standard SV-ED-230a.2, we pivot from system defense to the actual handling and flow of the student information itself. This is where we essentially track the journey of data through the institution. But before we track it, we have to delineate exactly what it is we are protecting. The standards make a very clear distinction here. On one hand, you have demographic data. This is the broad strokes information that distinguishes a population, things like gender, age, ethnicity, or primary language. On the other hand, you have personal data. This is highly sensitive stuff because it relates directly to an identified or identifiable living individual. And keep in mind, if you collect enough seemingly harmless demographic data points together, it can quickly lead to identifying a specific person, which instantly turns it into personal data.
The standard maps out a 6-step journey for the information lifecycle: collection, use, retention, processing, disclosure, and ultimately destruction. Institutions have to comprehensively describe how their handling practices at each and every single one of these steps impact student privacy. It's like a chain. A weak link in any of these 6 stages compromises the whole shebang. Diving into those first 2 steps, collection and usage, executives have to meticulously account for the nuances of consent. An institution literally has to disclose what data it collects without consent, what requires an active opt-in, and what relies on an opt-out action from the student. Plus, when it comes to usage, they have to rigorously define the exact circumstances under which this data is used internally, or if it's shared, sold, rented, or distributed to third parties. Complete transparency at the very point of collection is what builds that foundational trust.
Looking at the tail end of the life cycle, retention and destruction policies are absolutely critical. You cannot just hoard student data indefinitely. Doing that creates a massive, totally unnecessary liability. Institutions must clearly define the types of data they retain, exactly how long they keep it, the practices they use to ensure it stays secure during that time, and finally, this is a big one, how it is completely and permanently destroyed when that retention period is up. And that brings us to Section 4, Evaluating Privacy Impacts. So, we've seen the life cycle, but how do we proactively ensure that this entire 6-step journey actually conforms to our policies and successfully mitigates risk out there in the real world? Well, this is where impact assessments come in. Institutions are expected to use privacy impact assessments, or PIAs, and data protection impact assessments, DPIAs. These are comprehensive, proactive analyses that look incredibly deeply at how information is being handled. They ensure everything strictly conforms to legal, regulatory, and internal policy requirements. Essentially, they help determine the real-world risks of holding on to electronic info, and they evaluate alternative processes to mitigate those risks before a breach ever even happens. It's all about being proactive, not reactive.
As we wrap up this briefing, you really have to ask yourself a critical question. When investors, accreditors, or even prospective students look at your institution's cybersecurity posture and your data lifecycle management, what do they actually see? Do they see a vulnerable liability just waiting to make front-page news for a data breach? Or do they see a well-managed, NIST-aligned digital fortress that treats student privacy as a serious competitive advantage? In today's digital educational landscape, proactive cyber defense isn't just an IT checklist item anymore. It is the absolute foundation of institutional trust and sustainability. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.